I knew something was wrong the moment I heard the grinding noise coming from outside my house at 6:30 on a Saturday morning in late January. My name is Felix Morrison, and I had just moved to the Pleasant Valley subdivision in Columbus, Ohio, 3 months earlier. It was my first home purchase at 32 years old, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with vinyl siding and a decent backyard. The neighborhood seemed quiet when I toured it back in October, with neat lawns and friendly waves from people washing their cars. What the realtor conveniently forgot to mention was that Pleasant Valley had one of the most aggressive homeowner associations in Franklin County, led by a woman whose very existence would soon become the bane of mine. I rolled out of bed and stumbled to the window, pushing aside the curtain to see what was making that awful sound. The morning was still dark, with only the faint glow of streetlights illuminating the fresh snowfall from the night before. We had gotten about 8 inches, which was pretty standard for Ohio in January. What was not standard was the sight of a bright orange snowplow attached to a white SUV currently pushing a massive pile of snow directly against the side of my house. I threw on jeans and a coat over my pajama shirt, jammed my feet into boots, and rushed outside into the freezing morning air. The temperature had to be around 15 degrees, and my breath came out in white clouds as I hurried around the side of my house. The SUV was still there, engine running, and I could see someone in the driver's seat. "Hey," I shouted, waving my arms. "What are you doing?" The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman in her mid-50s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She wore a puffy purple coat and had the kind of face that looked like it was permanently set to disapproval mode. Her lips were pursed, her eyes narrowed behind designer glasses, and she had that particular stance that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from a mile away. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and nasal. "I am clearing snow from the common areas, which is part of my duties as HOA president." "You just pushed a mountain of snow against my heat pump," I said, pointing to where my outdoor HVAC unit was now completely buried under at least 4 feet of packed snow. "That thing needs airflow to work properly." She looked at the buried unit, then back at me with an expression that suggested I was the one being unreasonable. The HOA bylaws require that all snow removal from sidewalks and common areas be completed by 7 a.m. following any snowfall exceeding 6 inches. I am simply following procedure. Following procedure. I felt my blood pressure rising despite the cold. "You buried my heating equipment." "Where exactly am I supposed to put all this snow?" "That is not my concern," she said primly. "Perhaps you should have considered the placement of your mechanical equipment before purchasing in Pleasant Valley. Now, if you will excuse me, I have 3 more streets to clear." She turned to get back in her SUV, and I noticed the vanity plate on the back, Horator, of course. "Wait, I didn't catch your name," I called out. She paused, 1 foot on the running board. "Brenda Whitmore." "I am the president of the Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association, and I have been for 7 years. You can find all relevant bylaws and regulations on our website. I suggest you familiarize yourself with them. We have standards here, Mr. Morrison." The fact that she already knew my name despite us never having met should have been my first warning sign about just how closely she monitored the neighborhood. But I was too focused on the immediate problem of my buried heat pump to think about the implications. She drove off, leaving me standing in the freezing cold, staring at what looked like a snowbank someone might build at a ski resort pressed against the side of my house. I could already feel the temperature inside dropping. My furnace was connected to that heat pump, and with no airflow, the whole system would shut down as a safety measure. I went back inside and checked the thermostat. Sure enough, The system had gone into an error state. The indoor temperature was showing 68 degrees, but I knew it would drop fast in this weather. I tried resetting the system, but the error code kept flashing. I needed to dig out that heat pump, and I needed to do it now. For the next 2 hours, I was outside in the brutal cold, shoveling snow. The pile Brenda had created was not just regular snow. It was the compacted, heavy stuff that the plow had pushed together from the entire street. My back ached, my fingers were numb despite my gloves, and I was pretty sure I was developing frostbite on my nose. Neighbors walked by with their dogs, giving me sympathetic looks but not stopping to help. I would later learn they were all terrified of crossing Brenda. By 9 a.m., I had finally cleared enough snow to expose the heat pump unit. The metal housing was dented, and one of the fan blades visible through the top grate was bent at an odd angle. My heart sank. This was not just a simple clearing job anymore. The weight and force of all that snow had actually damaged the equipment. I went back inside, cranked up the emergency heat setting on my thermostat, which would use the expensive electric backup coils instead of the heat pump, and started making phone calls. It was Saturday, which meant most HVAC companies were either closed or charging weekend emergency rates. After calling 6 different places, I finally found a company called Reliable Heating and Cooling that could send someone out that afternoon. The technician who showed up was a guy in his 40s named Doug. He had that weathered look of someone who had been crawling around in attics and crawl spaces for decades. He took one look at the heat pump, let out a low whistle, and shook his head. "Yeah, this unit is toast," he said, running his hand along the dented housing. "See this here. The fan assembly is bent, the housing is compromised, and I would bet money the compressor is damaged too. Something hit this with a lot of force." "A snowplow," I said bitterly. "My HOA president decided to bury it this morning." Doug raised his eyebrows. "Pleasant Valley HOA by any chance?" "Yeah, how did you know? We have gotten calls from this neighborhood before. Lady named Brenda, right? Real piece of work." "Last year, she tried to fine one of my customers because she did not like the way our service van looked parked on the street while we were doing repairs. Called it an eyesore." "That sounds about right," I muttered. "So what am I looking at here?" Doug pulled out a tablet and started tapping on it. "A new heat pump installed is going to run you about $8,000. This is a 3-ton unit, and with labor, permits, and the refrigerant, that is the going rate. I can get a crew out here Monday to do the install if you approve it today." $8,000. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I had just put every penny I had saved into the down payment on this house. My emergency fund was barely $3,000, and I was still setting up my new job at the insurance company downtown. I definitely did not have $8,000 lying around. "Is there any way to repair it instead of replacing it?" I asked hopefully. Doug shook his head. "Even if I could patch up the housing and replace the fan assembly, that compressor damage is a killer. And honestly, with the extent of the damage, you would just be throwing good money after bad. It needs to be replaced." I thanked Doug and told him I would call back once I figured out how to handle the payment. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen and trying to figure out what to do. My credit cards were nearly maxed out from the move and buying furniture. A personal loan would take days to process, and I needed heat now. The electric backup coils were running my electricity bill through the roof. That was when I remembered something my father had told me years ago, when I was having trouble with a contractor who did shoddy work on my apartment. "Always check if their insurance covers it," he had said. Most professionals carry liability insurance for exactly these situations. I pulled up the Pleasant Valley HOA website that Brenda had mentioned. It was an overly complicated site with drop-down menus for everything and a color scheme that looked like it had not been updated since 2005. After clicking through several pages of bylaws, meeting minutes, and violation notices, I found a page labeled HOA Insurance and Policies. According to the information listed, the HOA carried a general liability policy through American Shield Insurance with a $5 million coverage limit. There was even a phone number listed for filing claims. I grabbed my phone and called immediately, not wanting to lose my nerve. The claims line was automated at first, but after pressing several buttons, I got through to a real person. Her name was Sandra, and she sounded bored until I explained my situation. "So let me make sure I have this right," Sandra said, and I could hear her typing. "The HOA president was operating a snowplow and damaged your property, specifically your HVAC system." "That is exactly right." She plowed snow from the street directly onto my heat pump unit, burying it under several feet of compacted snow. The weight and force damaged the unit beyond repair. "And you have documentation of this damage?" "I have photos, a service report from an HVAC technician, and I can get witness statements if needed. My entire street saw her doing the snow removal this morning." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Okay, Mr. Morrison, I am going to open a claim for you. The claim number is as 2026-089342. You should receive an email confirmation within an hour. We will need you to submit all documentation, including photos, repair estimates, and any witness statements you can provide. An adjuster will be assigned to your case within 2 business days." 2 business days, I asked. "It is Saturday." "So that means I would not hear anything until Wednesday." "Tuesday is a business day, so likely by end of day Tuesday," Sandra corrected. "In the meantime, if you need to proceed with emergency repairs, keep all receipts. If the claim is approved, those expenses will be reimbursed." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair feeling both relieved and anxious. At least I had started the process, but I still needed to figure out how to pay for the new heat pump in the meantime. I decided to call my brother, Derek, who worked in property management and might have some advice. $8,000, ouch, Derek said when I explained the situation. "But yeah, you did the right thing filing with their insurance. HOA general liability should definitely cover this. It is direct property damage caused by the HOA's actions. Open and shut case." "The adjuster is not coming until Tuesday, though. I need heat now. It is 15 degrees outside. Put it on a credit card if you have to," Derek advised. "Or see if the HVAC company will do a payment plan. Some of them work with financing companies. But get it fixed now, because if your pipes freeze, you are looking at way more than $8,000 in damages, and that might not be covered." He was right, of course. I called Doug back and asked about financing options. Reliable Heating and Cooling worked with a company called Green Sky that offered financing for home improvements. The interest rate was not great, but they could approve me quickly, and I could pay it off as soon as the insurance claim came through. By Sunday afternoon, I had a new heat pump installed, and my house was finally warming back up to a comfortable temperature. The total bill came to $8,300 after permits and a Sunday rush installation fee. I signed the financing papers with a knot in my stomach, knowing I was going to be paying interest on this until the insurance claim was resolved. Monday morning, I submitted all my documentation to American Shield Insurance through their online portal. I included the photos I had taken of the buried heat pump, the photos of the damaged unit, Doug's initial assessment report, the invoice for the new installation, and a detailed written statement describing exactly what had happened. I also walked around the neighborhood that evening and knocked on doors, asking if anyone had witnessed Brenda plowing snow on Saturday morning. Most people were sympathetic, but hesitant to get involved. I got a lot of responses like, "I am sorry that happened to you, but I really cannot afford to get on Brenda's bad side, and we have to live here. You understand?" One older gentleman named Walter, who lived 4 houses down from me, was the exception. "I saw the whole thing," Walter said, inviting me into his living room. He was in his 70s with white hair and kind eyes. "Been living here for 20 years, and Brenda has gotten progressively worse over time. Started out reasonable enough, but power went to her head. I will write you a statement, and I will testify if needed. Someone needs to stand up to her." Walter's written statement was detailed and exactly what I needed. He described seeing Brenda's SUV with the plow attachment, confirmed the time as approximately 6:30 a.m., and stated that he witnessed her deliberately pushing snow against the side of my house, where the heat pump was located. He even mentioned that she had done similar things to other residents over the years, but no one had ever pursued it legally. Tuesday came and went with no word from the insurance adjuster. I called the claims line Wednesday morning and was told that adjuster Mike Reynolds had been assigned to my case and would be contacting me shortly. Shortly turned out to mean Thursday afternoon. Mike Reynolds called my cell while I was at work. I stepped out of my cubicle at the insurance company where I worked in underwriting, finding a quiet conference room to take the call. "Mr. Morrison, I have reviewed your claim and I need to schedule a site visit," Mike said. He had a gruff voice but did not sound unfriendly. "I need to see the property, the new installation, and I would like to see the damaged unit if you still have it." I told the installer to leave it. "It is in my garage." "Perfect. How about tomorrow morning, 9 a.m.? I took a personal day from work on Friday to meet with Mike. He showed up right on time in a sedan with American Shield Insurance logos on the doors. Mike was a stocky guy in his 50s, wearing khakis and a polo shirt despite the cold weather. He had a camera, a clipboard, and a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately appreciated. I walked him through everything that had happened, showed him where the heat pump had been buried, let him examine the damaged unit in my garage, and showed him the new installation. He took photos of everything and made extensive notes. "I also have a witness statement from a neighbor," I said, handing him the envelope with Walter's written statement. Mike read through it carefully. "This is good. Very detailed. Okay, Mr. Morrison, here is where we stand. Based on the evidence you have provided and what I am seeing here, this appears to be a straightforward property damage claim. The HOA's actions directly caused damage to your property. The liability should be covered under their general policy. So, I will be reimbursed for the full cost. Assuming everything checks out in my final report, yes. The claim will likely be approved for the full $8,300. You should see a decision within a week, and if approved, the check will be mailed to you within 10 business days after that." I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you. You have no idea how stressful this has been." "I believe it," Mike said, packing up his camera. "For what it is worth, I have handled other claims involving this HOA. Between you and me, they need to be more careful. This is the 3rd claim against them in 2 years." After Mike left, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since Saturday morning. I went about my weekend trying to put the whole mess behind me and focusing on settling into my new home. That peaceful interlude lasted exactly until Monday afternoon, when I found a certified letter in my mailbox from the Pleasant Valley HOA. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead and signed by Brenda Whitmore in her capacity as president. My hands actually shook as I read it. Dear Mr. Morrison, it has come to the attention of the Pleasant Valley Homeowners Association Board of Directors that you have violated multiple community bylaws in recent days. Specifically, you have violated Section 12.4 regarding snow removal by allowing excessive snow accumulation against your home structure, creating an unsightly appearance visible from the street. Additionally, you violated Section 8.7 by having an HVAC contractor vehicle parked on the street during weekend hours, which is prohibited under our commercial vehicle restrictions. You are hereby fined $200 for the snow removal violation and $300 for the commercial vehicle violation, for a total of $500. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional fines and potential lien placement on your property. If you wish to appeal these violations, you must submit a written appeal to the board within 10 business days and appear at the next board meeting scheduled for February 15th. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each reading. This woman had damaged my property, cost me $8,300 that I did not have, and now she was fining me for violations that were the direct result of her own actions. The snow accumulation was from her burying my heat pump. The HVAC contractor was there to fix the damage she caused. I immediately called Derek. She is retaliating, I said after reading him the letter. This is blatant retaliation. That is exactly what it is, Derek agreed, and it is probably illegal. HOA retaliation laws vary by state, but Ohio has some protections. You need to document everything. Save that letter, save all correspondence, and absolutely submit an appeal. But here is the thing, even if you win the appeal, she is going to keep coming after you. People like Brenda do not stop until they are forced to stop. So what do? Fight it. Appeal the fines, make sure the insurance claim goes through, and if she keeps retaliating, you might need to talk to a lawyer about harassment. Also, start going to the HOA board meetings. You are a homeowner there, which means you have a voice. Most residents do not show up to meetings, which is how people like Brenda maintain power. I spent that evening drafting my appeal letter. I kept it factual and professional, explaining that the snow accumulation was caused by the HOA president's snow removal actions, and that the HVAC contractor was performing emergency repairs, necessary, due to damage caused by those same actions. I printed 3 copies, mailed one to the HOA's P.O. Box address via certified mail, hand-delivered one to Brenda's house, and kept one for my records. Brenda's house was easy to identify. It was the only one on the street with a decorative sign in the front yard that read, HOA President Lives Here, in swirling script. Her house was a large colonial-style home with perfect landscaping, even in winter. Every bush was trimmed with geometric precision. The walkway had been cleared of snow down to the bare concrete, and even the icicles hanging from her gutters seemed to be arranged symmetrically. I rang the doorbell and heard a small dog yapping inside. Brenda opened the door, and her expression immediately soured when she saw me. Mr. Morrison, to what do I owe this intrusion? I am hand-delivering my appeal of the violations you sent me, I said, holding out the envelope. I wanted to make sure you received it. She took the envelope like it was contaminated. The appeal process is outlined in the bylaws. You will receive a response in due time. I also wanted to let you know that I have filed an insurance claim against the HOA for the damage to my heat pump. Her eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composure. I beg your pardon. The snowplow you were operating pushed snow onto my heat pump and damaged it beyond repair. The replacement cost is $8,300, and your HOA insurance is covering it. The adjuster has already completed his investigation. That is absurd, Brenda sputtered. I was performing my duties as HOA president. Snow removal is part of maintaining the common areas. If your equipment was damaged, that is due to improper placement, not my actions. The adjuster and the insurance company disagree. I have a witness statement and photographic evidence. The claim is being processed. Brenda's face flushed red. We will see about that. This association has excellent legal counsel, and we do not take fraudulent claims lightly. It is not fraudulent. But speaking of legal counsel, you might want to consult yours about those retaliation fines you sent me. Ohio law has protections against HOA retaliation, and fining me for violations that were directly caused by your actions, and for hiring contractors to repair damage you caused seems like textbook retaliation. I turned and walked away before she could respond, my heart pounding. I had never been the type to confront people, but something about Brenda's entitled attitude brought out a fighting spirit I did not know I had. The next week was quiet on the HOA front, which made me nervous. I kept expecting another letter or some new complaint, but nothing came. Then, 8 days after Mike Reynolds' site visit, I received an email from American Shield Insurance. The subject line read, "Claim as 2026-089342 approved." I opened the email with shaking hands. "Dear Mr. Morrison, your claim for property damage has been approved in full. A check in the amount of $8,300 will be mailed to your address on file within 7 to 10 business days. Please allow adequate time for mail delivery. If you have any questions regarding this claim, please contact our claims department. Thank you for your patience during this process." I actually let out a whoop of joy right there in my cubicle, earning confused looks from my coworkers. $8,300. The full amount. I could pay off the Green Sky financing immediately and avoid paying a cent of interest. That weekend, I received another piece of mail from the HOA. This one was a notice about the February 15th board meeting with an agenda attached. My appeal was listed as item 7 on the agenda, scheduled for discussion at approximately 7:30 p.m. The meeting was open to all residents and would be held at the community center. I marked my calendar and started preparing. Derek advised me to present my case clearly and calmly, stick to facts, and bring all my documentation. Board meetings are public record, he reminded me. So everything said there can be used later if needed. Keep that in mind. The insurance check arrived on February 10th, a Tuesday. I deposited it immediately and paid off the entire Green Sky loan that same day. For the first time since that awful Saturday morning, I felt like I could breathe normally. My heat pump was fixed, the cost was covered, and I had successfully stood up to Brenda's retaliation attempt. Friday, February 15th was cold and cloudy, threatening more snow. The Pleasant Valley Community Center was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, with a meeting room that could hold maybe 50 people. When I arrived at 6:45 p.m., there were only about a dozen residents scattered in folding chairs. Walter was there and waved me over to sit next to him. "Good turnout," Walter said sarcastically. "Usually there are only 5 or 6 people. Why does no one come to these meetings? Because Brenda runs them like a dictatorship. She controls the agenda, talks over anyone who disagrees, and has her little faction on the board who vote however she tells them to. Most people gave up years ago. The board consisted of 5 members, and they sat at a table at the front of the room. Brenda was in the center, flanked by 2 women who looked to be in their 60s, and 2 men who looked uncomfortable to be there. Brenda called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. The first 6 agenda items were mind-numbingly boring. Approval of last month's minutes. Treasurer's report showing the HOA had $80,000 in reserves. Discussion of spring landscaping contracts. A debate about whether to repair or replace the neighborhood entrance sign that lasted 20 minutes and went nowhere. I watched residents check their phones, stifle yawns, and generally look like they wanted to be anywhere else. Finally, at 7:35 p.m., Brenda announced Agenda Item 7 with a sour expression. Appeal of violations issued to Felix Morrison of 42 Maple Ridge Drive. Mr. Morrison, you have 5 minutes to present your appeal. I stood up, my folder of documentation in hand, and walked to the front of the room. I had practiced this speech a dozen times, but my mouth still felt dry. Thank you. On January 26th, I was issued 2 violations by the HOA. The first was for excessive snow accumulation against my home. The second was for having a commercial vehicle parked on my street during weekend hours. I am appealing both violations because they were the direct result of actions taken by the HOA president. I proceeded to explain exactly what had happened, showing photos of my buried heat pump, the damaged unit, and the timeline of events. Several residents sat up straighter, paying attention now. Walter nodded along encouragingly. The snow accumulation was not due to neglect on my part. It was caused by Mrs. Whitmore's snowplow pushing approximately 4 feet of compacted snow directly onto my heat pump unit. The HVAC contractor was performing emergency repairs to fix the damage caused by that action. Neither violation should be upheld because I did nothing wrong. The damage and subsequent need for repairs were entirely caused by the HOA president's snow removal methods. Brenda's face had been getting progressively redder during my presentation. "Are you quite finished?" she snapped. I also want to note for the record that the HOA's insurance company agreed with my assessment of fault. They approved my claim for property damage in full and issued payment for $8,300 to cover the replacement heat pump. American Shield Insurance conducted a full investigation and determined that the HOA's actions caused the damage. That got a reaction from the board. The 2 men exchanged glances, and one of the women whispered something to Brenda. The room's energy had shifted. Residents were murmuring to each other. "The insurance company's decision has no bearing on HOA violations," Brenda said tightly. "This board is responsible for enforcing community standards, and you violated clearly stated bylaws. Bylaws that could not possibly be followed given the circumstances you created," I countered. "How was I supposed to remove snow that your plow put there? And why would I be penalized for hiring emergency repair services?" One of the men on the board, whose nameplate read Thomas Green, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, if the insurance company paid out a claim, does not that indicate liability on our part?" "The insurance company is being overly cautious," Brenda said dismissively. "That does not mean the HOA was actually at fault." "But they paid $8,300, Thomas persisted. "That is going to affect our premiums. Why was the board not informed about this incident or the claim?" I handled it as part of my presidential duties. I do not need to bring every minor issue to the full board. $8,300 is not minor, the other man, whose nameplate read David Chen, said. He looked at me. "Mr. Morrison, you said you have photographic evidence." I handed copies of my documentation to each board member. They passed the photos around, and I watched their expressions change as they reviewed the evidence. Even the 2 women who seemed to be Brenda's allies looked uncomfortable. "I move to dismiss both violations against Mr. Morrison," Thomas said suddenly. The evidence clearly shows he was not at fault, and penalizing him for circumstances created by HOA actions is inappropriate. I second, David said immediately. Brenda looked furious. This is highly irregular. We need to discuss this in executive session first. There is nothing to discuss, Thomas said firmly. We have a motion and a second, all in favor of dismissing the violations. Thomas and David raised their hands. After a moment's hesitation, the two women also raised their hands, avoiding Brenda's glare. It was 4-1. Motion carries, Thomas said. The violations are dismissed. Mr. Morrison, you owe nothing, and this will not appear on your HOA record. This is a mistake, Brenda said, her voice shaking with anger. You are setting a precedent that residents can ignore bylaws whenever convenient. We are setting a precedent that the board will not penalize residents for the consequences of HOA actions, David corrected. Which is how it should be. I thanked the board and returned to my seat, feeling like I had won a major victory. Walter clapped me on the shoulder and whispered, "That is the first time I have seen anyone stand up to her successfully in years." The meeting continued with a few more minor items, but the tension in the room was palpable. Brenda rushed through the remaining agenda items and adjourned the meeting at 8:15. As residents filed out, several people stopped to congratulate me or share their own horror stories about dealing with Brenda. Thomas and David approached me before I could leave. "Mr. Morrison, do you have a minute?" Thomas asked. Of course. We stepped into a corner of the room. Thomas was a man in his late 50s with graying hair and glasses. David was younger, maybe mid-40s, with an earnest expression. They both looked tired. "We wanted to apologize," Thomas said. "David and I have been on this board for 2 years, and we have been trying to rein in some of Brenda's more excessive behaviors, but she has been president for so long that she thinks the HOA is her personal fiefdom. We had no idea about the insurance claim until you mentioned it tonight," David added. "That should have been disclosed to the full board immediately. An $8,300 payout is going to impact our budget and premiums. You guys have any recourse?" I asked. "I mean, can the board remove her as president?" Thomas sighed. "Technically, yes. The bylaws allow for a vote of no confidence requiring a majority of board members, but Brenda has allies and she is vicious when crossed. She has run smear campaigns against residents who challenge her. Several people have moved out of the neighborhood just to get away from her. That is insane. Someone needs to stop her." "We agree," David said, "but we need more board members willing to stand up to her. Elections are in April. There are 2 seats up for election, including one of her allies. If we could get the right people on the board, we might have enough votes to remove her." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you stood up to her," Thomas said. "You did not back down, you documented everything, and you handled it properly. We need more people like you involved in the HOA. Have you ever considered running for the board?" I had not, and the idea made me nervous. I had only lived here for 3 months. But looking at Thomas and David's hopeful expressions and thinking about what Brenda had put me through, I found myself nodding. "I would need to understand the bylaws better and know what I am getting into." "We can help with that," David said eagerly. "The time commitment is not huge, just a monthly meeting and occasional email discussions, but having another reasonable voice on the board would make a huge difference." We exchanged phone numbers, and they promised to send me information about running for election. As I drove home that night, I felt both exhilarated and anxious. I had moved to Columbus for a fresh start and a quiet life. Getting involved in HOA politics was the opposite of quiet. But Brenda needed to be stopped, and if I did not stand up, who would? Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas and David sent me extensive information about HOA governance, the current budget, ongoing issues in the neighborhood, and the election process. To run for the board, I needed to submit a petition with signatures from 10 residents by March 1st, and then I would appear on the ballot for the April meeting. Getting 10 signatures turned out to be easier than expected. I started by asking Walter, who signed enthusiastically and offered to help me campaign. Then I knocked on doors up and down my street, explaining who I was and why I wanted to join the board. Most people were supportive, and several shared their own negative experiences with Brenda. There was Mrs. Patterson, whose fence had been 6 inches too tall according to Brenda's interpretation of the bylaws, resulting in a fine and a year-long battle. There was the young couple at the end of the street who had been fined for parking their truck in their driveway because Brenda deemed it a commercial vehicle, even though it was just a personal pickup. There was the retired teacher who had been harassed about the color of her front door being not within approved color guidelines, even though it was literally the same color it had been when she bought the house 10 years earlier. By February 25th, I had 23 signatures, more than double what I needed. I submitted my petition to the HOA via certified mail and hand-delivered a copy to Brenda's house. She did not answer the door, but I saw her curtain twitch, so I knew she was home and knew I was there. The election would take place at the April 19th board meeting. There were 2 seats available and 3 candidates running. Besides me, there was Brenda's friend Margaret running for re-election, and a woman named Susan Miller, who I did not know much about yet. The bylaws required that all candidates be given an opportunity to speak for 5 minutes at the meeting before voting took place. March was relatively quiet on the HOA front. I received my annual HOA dues notice for $1,200, which I paid on time. I continued attending the monthly board meetings, taking notes and learning how the organization functioned. Brenda largely ignored me, which was fine with me. Then, in early April, I came home from work to find a violation notice taped to my front door. According to Brenda, my lawn had not been raked of winter debris and my gutters had visible leaves, both of which violated Section 15.2 regarding spring property maintenance. The fine was $150. I looked at my lawn. There was barely any debris, just a few stray leaves that had blown over from neighboring yards. My gutters had maybe a handful of leaves visible, nothing excessive. This was clearly retaliation for running against her candidate, and it was not even subtle. I took photos of my lawn and gutters from multiple angles, then walked up and down the street photographing other houses. At least a dozen homes had far more visible debris than mine. I documented everything, sent an appeal letter to the HOA, and copied Thomas and David on an email explaining what was happening. Thomas replied within an hour. "This is beyond inappropriate. I am calling for a special board meeting to discuss this pattern of behavior. Stand by." The special meeting was scheduled for April 10th. The agenda had only one item: discussion of HOA president's violation enforcement practices and potential conflicts of interest. I attended along with about 30 other residents, the largest turnout Walter said he had ever seen for a non-election meeting. Thomas chaired the meeting since it was about Brenda's conduct. He presented evidence of multiple violations issued to residents who had either filed insurance claims against the HOA, complained about board decisions, or were running for board positions. The pattern was undeniable. "This is defamatory," Brenda protested. "I enforce violations equally and fairly." "Then, why did you fine Mr. Morrison for lawn debris when at least 12 other houses on his street have more visible debris?" David asked, holding up the photos I had submitted. I do not have time to inspect every property constantly. I address violations as I see them. You saw Mr. Morrison's property the day after he submitted his election petition, Thomas said. The timing is suspicious at best. The meeting devolved into an argument, with Brenda's two allies defending her and Thomas and David calling for better oversight. No votes were taken because it was a special meeting, not a regular board meeting, but the message was clear. Brenda's power was being challenged publicly, and she was not handling it well. After the meeting, Brenda approached me in the parking lot. Her expression was cold and calculating. You have made a very big mistake, Mr. Morrison. This neighborhood was peaceful before you arrived and started causing problems. I am not the one causing problems, I said evenly. I am just responding to them. We will see how the election goes. And even if you somehow win a seat, I will still be president. I have been running this HOA for 7 years, and I will continue to do so. You are out of your depth. She walked away before I could respond. Walter, who had witnessed the exchange, shook his head. She is going to escalate. I have seen her do this before. Be careful. Walter was right. Over the next week, I received 3 more violation notices. My mailbox was not properly maintained because it had a small rust spot. My trash cans were visible from the street, even though they were in my garage with the door closed. She claimed she could see them through the window. My house number was not in compliance because the numbers were supposedly half an inch too small, though they were the same numbers that had been there when I bought the house. Each violation came with a $100 fine. I appealed every single one, documenting the absurdity of each claim with photos and measurements. Other residents started reporting that they were also receiving unusual violations if they had signed my election petition. Thomas called me on April 15th, 4 days before the election. David and I are calling for a vote of no confidence at the April meeting, right after the elections. If you and Susan Miller win the open seats, we will have 4 votes to Brenda's 1. We can remove her as president and elect a new officer. Will that not cause chaos? Probably. But she has gone too far. The harassment and retaliation have to stop. Are you willing to see this through? I thought about the past 3 months, the stress, the expense, the constant battles over nothing. I thought about the other residents living in fear of offending the HOA president. Yes. Let us do it. The April 19th board meeting had standing room only. Over 60 residents packed into the community center, an unheard of turnout. The energy was electric. Everyone knew something big was happening. Brenda called the meeting to order, and her hands shook slightly as she held the gavel. The agenda moved quickly through routine items until we reached the election portion of the evening. Margaret spoke first, giving a 5-minute speech about her years of service and commitment to maintaining property values. She did not mention Brenda once, which I found interesting. Susan Miller went next. She was a woman in her 40s, a lawyer who worked downtown. Her speech focused on transparency, fair enforcement of rules, and better communication with residents. The crowd responded positively. Then it was my turn. I walked to the front of the room and looked at all the faces staring back at me. I saw Walter smiling encouragingly. I saw the residents I had talked to while gathering signatures. I saw Thomas and David looking hopeful, and I saw Brenda glaring at me with undisguised hatred. 3 months ago, I moved to Pleasant Valley excited to be a first-time homeowner in what seemed like a great neighborhood, I began. Since then, I have had my property damaged by HOA snow removal, been fined for violations that were not my fault, been harassed with frivolous violation notices, and been told by multiple residents that they live in fear of their HOA president. This is not how a community should function. An HOA exists to maintain property values and provide services, not to intimidate and retaliate against residents who dare to disagree. If elected, I will work to restore fairness, transparency, and accountability to this board. Thank you." The room erupted in applause, something I had not expected. Brenda banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Voting was done by secret ballot. Each household got one vote, and ballots were distributed and collected within 15 minutes. Thomas and David counted votes in a side room while the meeting continued with other agenda items that no one was paying attention to. When they returned, Thomas was trying not to look too happy. David announced the results. For the 2 open board seats, Susan Miller received 47 votes, and Felix Morrison received 46 votes. Margaret received 23 votes. Susan Miller and Felix Morrison are elected to the board. More applause. Margaret looked relieved more than disappointed. Brenda's expression was frozen. Thomas wasted no time. "I have a motion to make. Given the pattern of retaliation and harassment documented over the past 2 months, I move for a vote of no confidence in Brenda Whitmore as HOA president." "I second," David said immediately. "This is out of order," Brenda protested. "You cannot just remove a sitting president without cause or due process." "We have cause, and the bylaws allow for this exact process," Thomas said. He looked at the newly expanded board, now consisting of himself, David, Brenda, Susan, and me. Board members, all in favor of removing Brenda Whitmore as president, Thomas, David, Susan, and I all raised our hands. 4-1, motion carries. Brenda Whitmore is removed as president of the Pleasant Valley HOA. I nominate Susan Miller for the position of president. Everything happened so fast that Brenda did not seem to process it. She sat frozen in her chair as the board voted unanimously to elect Susan as the new president. Susan stood up, looking both honored and nervous, and took the center seat at the board table. "This is illegal," Brenda finally sputtered. "I am going to sue. I am going to sue all of you, the HOA, everyone. You cannot do this to me." "We just did," Thomas said calmly. "And it was entirely within the bylaws. You can consult the HOA attorney if you like." Brenda stood up abruptly, knocking her chair over. "This neighborhood is going to fall apart without me. You will all see. Property values will plummet. Standards will disappear. You have made a terrible mistake." She stormed out of the meeting, and the room was silent for a moment before someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. Some people were cheering, and I felt like I had just witnessed a revolution. Susan officially took over as president and led the rest of the meeting with a calm, professional demeanor. One of her first acts was to move that all outstanding violation appeals be reviewed by the full board with fresh eyes, including all violations issued to me. The motion passed unanimously. After the meeting, I was surrounded by residents thanking me, shaking my hand, and expressing relief that Brenda was finally gone. Walter had tears in his eyes. 20 years I have been waiting for this," he said. 20 years. Thank you." The following weeks were surprisingly drama-free. Susan proved to be an excellent president, organized and fair. The board reviewed all recent violations and dismissed most of them, including all of mine. Brenda did consult with an attorney but ultimately did not file any lawsuits, probably because her lawyer told her she had no case. At the May board meeting, we addressed the insurance issue. Our agent from American Shield Insurance attended to discuss the impact of my claim. Our premiums were going up by 12%, but the agent noted that this was actually lower than expected because the incident was classified as an isolated event rather than a pattern of negligence. Going forward, I recommend that the HOA hire professional snow removal services rather than having board members operating heavy equipment, the agent said. It reduces liability exposure significantly. We voted to contract with a professional service for the following winter. Problem solved. In June, I received a letter from American Shield Insurance that I had not been expecting. It was addressed to me as both a resident and a board member, explaining that Brenda Whitmore's personal homeowner's insurance policy had actually been the primary coverage for my claim, not the HOA's general liability policy. The letter explained that because Brenda had been operating the snowplow as an individual, even though she claimed to be doing HOA work, her personal liability coverage had kicked in first. The HOA's insurance was secondary and had not actually paid out anything. Brenda's insurance had covered the full $8,300, and her policy rates had increased substantially as a result. I shared this information with the board at our June meeting. Susan looked thoughtful. So essentially, Brenda's retaliation against you ended up costing her personally, not the HOA. Appears that way, I said. Her insurance, her rate increase. There is a certain poetic justice to that, Thomas said with a slight grin. Life in Pleasant Valley settled into a comfortable routine after that. The board functioned smoothly, with 5 reasonable people making decisions together instead of one person ruling by fear. Violation enforcement became fair and consistent. Communication with residents improved dramatically. I ran into Brenda occasionally at the neighborhood pool or the mailbox area. She always looked the other way and never spoke to me. I heard through the grapevine that she was considering moving but had not listed her house yet. Some residents felt bad for her, saying we had been too harsh. Most felt that she had brought it on herself. Walter became one of my closest friends in the neighborhood. We had dinner together regularly, and he loved recounting the story of the April meeting to anyone who would listen. The People's Uprising, he called it, which I thought was a bit dramatic but accurate enough. The insurance check I had received, followed by the dismissal of all those bogus fines, meant I came out of the whole ordeal financially whole. My credit was intact, my heat pump worked perfectly, and I had learned valuable lessons about documentation, persistence, and standing up for yourself. In August, Susan announced she was stepping down as president due to a job transfer to another city. The board voted to make me president, which I accepted with some trepidation. But with Thomas and David's support, and 2 new excellent board members who were elected in the July special election to fill vacancies, I felt confident we could continue managing the HOA properly. My first major decision as president was to update the bylaws to include specific provisions against retaliation, clearer guidelines for violation enforcement, and a formal appeals process that could not be overridden by a single board member. The changes passed with overwhelming resident support. Brenda finally listed her house in September. It sold in 3 weeks to a young family with 2 kids. I introduced myself to them when they moved in, welcomed them to the neighborhood, and assured them that the HOA was there to help, not to harass. They seemed relieved. On moving day, Brenda loaded the last boxes into her truck, and I happened to be getting my mail. We made eye contact across the street. For a moment, I thought she might say something, maybe offer some parting words or even an apology. Instead, she got in her truck and drove away without looking back. Walter watched from his porch. "The witch is dead," he called over cheerfully. "Walter, that is mean, but accurate." He came over to stand next to me. "You know what the best part of this whole thing is? She pushed snow onto your heat pump thinking she was punishing you for something, and it ended up costing her thousands of dollars and her position. Sometimes karma works perfectly." He was right, of course. If Brenda had just done her snow removal responsibly, or if she had apologized and worked with me after the damage occurred, none of the rest would have happened. But her arrogance, her need for control, and her vindictive retaliation had set off a chain of events that cost her everything she valued. I learned a lot during those intense months. I learned that documentation is everything, that insurance exists for exactly these kinds of situations, and that standing up to bullies is hard but necessary. I learned that most people want to do the right thing but are afraid to be the first one to speak up. And I learned that a homeowner association, properly run, can actually be a good thing for a community. My father called me one evening in October and I told him the whole story from beginning to end. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I am proud of you," he finally said. "You handled that exactly right. Documentation, insurance, standing your ground. And you did not just fix your own problem, you fixed the whole neighborhood's problem." "I got lucky," I said. "If that insurance claim had not been approved, I do not know what I would have done. You made your own luck by documenting everything and following through." That is not luck. That is smart. Looking back now, the whole experience feels almost surreal. It started with a grinding noise on a cold Saturday morning and ended with me becoming HOA president and fundamentally changing how the organization operated. $8,300 in damages became the catalyst for positive change affecting over 200 families. The new heat pump still runs perfectly. Every time I hear it kick on, I think about that morning when Brenda buried it in snow, probably never imagining that her petty action would have such far-reaching consequences. Her insurance covered my repair bill completely, just as the title of this story suggests, but that was only the beginning of what she ended up paying. She paid with her reputation, her position of power, her increased insurance rates, and ultimately her home when she could not stand to live in a neighborhood where she was no longer in charge. All because she could not admit a mistake, could not treat a new resident with basic respect, and could not understand that actions have consequences. As for me, I am still living at 42 Maple Ridge Drive. I am still serving on the HOA board, now as president. The neighborhood is thriving with clear rules, fair enforcement, and open communication. We have higher attendance at board meetings, more resident involvement in decisions, and far fewer complaints. Property values have actually increased since Brenda left, which I find ironic given her dire predictions. Turns out people like living in neighborhoods where they are not afraid of their HOA. Who knew? Walter still jokes about starting a "Remember when Brenda was president" support group for residents with PTSD from her reign. I tell him that is unnecessary and probably mean. He says some things are too funny not to joke about. The whole experience taught me that homeownership is about more than just making mortgage payments and mowing the lawn. It is about being part of a community, standing up when things are wrong, and working together to make things better. It is about not backing down when someone tries to bully or intimidate you. And it is about understanding that systems like HOAs are only as good or bad as the people running them. I never wanted to be involved in HOA politics. I never wanted to fight with a neighborhood Karen over snow piles and heat pumps. But sometimes life pushes you into situations where you have to choose between giving in or fighting back. I chose to fight back, armed with documentation, insurance claims, and a belief that I was in the right. The fact that her insurance covered my repair bill completely was just the beginning of justice. The real victory was taking back a neighborhood from someone who had held it hostage for years, and giving power back to reasonable people who wanted to maintain a community, not rule over subjects. Every time I drive past where Brenda's HOA President Lives Here sign used to stand in her front yard, I smile. That sign is gone now, replaced by a family's welcome mat and children's toys scattered across the lawn. That is what a neighborhood should look like. Not perfect geometric precision and fear, but lived in, comfortable, and welcoming. My heat pump continues to run efficiently through winters and summers, never again buried under piles of snow pushed by an overzealous HOA president with a plow attachment. The new professional snow removal service we contracted does excellent work and somehow manages to clear the streets without burying anyone's equipment. It is amazing what happens when you hire people who know what they are doing and care about doing it right. I framed that final insurance letter, the one explaining that Brenda's personal insurance had covered my claim. It hangs in my home office as a reminder that documentation matters, that following proper procedures works, and that sometimes the bad guys really do face consequences for their actions. It is also a reminder that I am tougher than I thought I was, and that standing up for yourself can change everything. Pleasant Valley really is a pleasant place to live now, which feels appropriate given the name. The community center hosts neighborhood barbecues. Kids play safely in the streets, and people actually wave and smile at each other instead of avoiding eye contact for fear of being reported for some minor violation. That is what Brenda never understood. Her obsession with rules and control created fear, and fear destroys community. We have rules now, of course. We still have bylaws and standards and guidelines, but they are enforced fairly, with warnings before fines, and with understanding that people make mistakes and life gets busy. We work with residents instead of against them. Novel concept, I know. Thomas and David are still on the board, and they have become good friends. We grab lunch regularly and joke about the old days, which were only last year but feel like ancient history. They told me recently that they had been planning to move out of Pleasant Valley before everything changed. Now they plan to stay indefinitely. That might be the best measure of success I could ask for. The young family who bought Brenda's house integrated into the neighborhood beautifully. Their kids play with Walter's grandchildren when they visit. They attended their first board meeting last month and actually complimented us on how well-run and transparent everything was. They had lived in another HOA neighborhood before this and had horror stories that rivaled anything from Brenda's era. They said Pleasant Valley felt like paradise in comparison. I still work downtown at the insurance company, and my experience with the HOA claim actually helped me in my job. I understand the policyholder perspective better now. The stress of dealing with property damage, the relief when a claim is approved, the importance of good customer service during the process. It made me better at my job in unexpected ways. Sometimes I wonder what Brenda is doing now, wherever she ended up. I hope she learned something from the experience, though I doubt it. People like her rarely admit they were wrong. More likely, she tells everyone who will listen about the ungrateful residents who turned on her after years of dedicated service. She probably sees herself as the victim in this story. But history is written by the winners, and I am the one telling this story. The truth is that a petty, vindictive woman on a power trip pushed snow against my heat pump, damaged it, and then tried to punish me for the consequences of her own actions. Her insurance did indeed cover my repair bill completely, but that financial reimbursement was the least significant outcome of the whole mess. The real story is about a neighborhood that found its voice, about residents who were tired of living in fear, about a system that was broken and got fixed. The heat pump was just the catalyst. Brenda was just the villain. The neighborhood itself was the hero, and the happy ending belongs to everyone who lives here now. As I sit on my porch on this cool autumn evening, watching the sun set over Pleasant Valley, I think about how different things could have been. If that heat pump had been installed 3 feet to the left, Brenda's snow pile might have missed it. If I had not documented everything, the insurance claim might have been denied. If Thomas and David had not been on the board already, the vote of no confidence might have failed. So many small things had to align for the story to end the way it did, but they did align, and here we are. A functioning HOA, a happy neighborhood, and one very expensive lesson learned by a woman who thought she was untouchable. Her insurance covered my $8,300 repair bill completely, but she paid in so many other ways that dwarf that financial cost. Justice sometimes works exactly the way it should. Documentation, persistence, and standing up for what is right can actually win against bullies and tyrants. And sometimes, when someone pushes snow against your heat pump, they end up burying themselves instead.